One of the things that I wanted to remind everyone is that the two targets, outcomes that School to Home is really looking for is closing the digital divide and closing the achievement gap. And Elaine and Sunny and others were instrumental in 2009 in developing a change model, if you will. And so I thought I'd just quickly share with you the theory of action that we have that we're using to actually frame this evaluation through 5 research questions. The first one is implementation fidelity. How are our partners actually implementing the core components? And the change process indicates that if this is done with fidelity, it will lead to these next 2 things, which are successful integration of technology into classrooms with really strong pedagogy and a shift to a digital culture in the schools, as well as some real changes in homes where there's an effect on digital adoption and inclusion by parents. And then finally, that should lead to better student outcomes, which is, addressing that digital divide, although what we do typically is correlational, and then also influencing policy and practice. And it's a cyclical model because the more we do, the more we influence the policy and practice and adopt new norms. And we certainly have done that over the last year. So what are our sources of data? I think you guys are all aware, and I want to give a shout out to Augustine's team. He actually has reconstituted the way that the survey data collection is done so that every school has an individual survey where they collect data and add some questions that they're interested in as well. And the results are ready for them instantaneously, which is great. And you can see the numbers up here. We also did a principal survey, which is a reflection this year. We did 27 interviews. And of course, we've got some secondary data, including the management reports, single plans, the LCAPs, et cetera, et cetera. I want to give a shout out to the districts as well. You give a lot of time to us and a lot of insights into getting those survey responses up, and we really do appreciate that. So let me get into the research questions. The first one is really about fidelity of implementation. How are our participating schools implementing the 10 school to home core components, and what difference is that actually making is kind of the next one. You can see the 10 core components are here. You're very familiar with them. Notice that 5 are shaded just because those typically are leading indicators of where your school is going. And all 10 are absolutely important. And what are the results? Well, what we found from the data that we have is that there is overall implementation progress among all of the schools. We noticed this year that there were expanded targets, that you actually kind of put that bar a lot higher than it's been in the past. Some of you, in fact, all of you went after one-to-one school-wide, which is incredible, which means that all teachers were actually engaged in that, which is a real, a real sea change for your schools. And congratulations on setting those targets. And then you went after it with incredible effort. We heard so many stories about all the hard work that teachers were doing, they were introduced to new tools. They were actually doing trial and error to see if they would actually work. And we saw impressive progress on all fronts. So we really appreciate that. There still are some challenges in terms of parent engagement and coaching. Oftentimes you don't have the dollars for coaching that really would go. But overall, there was really impressive progress. You also made terrific gains with parent participation. We saw some real intentional outreach where you actually went after it and actually made sure that those parents had emails and that they were connected to the portal. And as that happened, and as distance learning happened, people began to be much more aware of the crucial role that parents played in the learning, especially when it was happening in the home. And you guys were very responsive in terms of the parent trainings. We heard a lot of stories that said, gee, we tried, the virtual trainings and we invited parents in, but in reality, the most effective way that we did this was one-on-one. And so that's a lot of work, but it's very, very effective as well. And lastly, the value of school to home in the learning environments. Our second research question is really about the impact. It's about integration into classrooms, and it's also about changing the digital environment and the school culture. And so we're looking at how did you were you actually able to integrate it into the fabric of the school? Were you able to engage students through that? Were you able to involve parents as learning partners? And were you able to shift the culture? And what did we find? Well, we found with our data sets that in the digital teaching and learning, your hard work paid off, that it translated into a lot of trial and error, which turned into best practices. One I'd like to call out is actually one that I have been so impressed with. It's real-time observation through Pear Deck and Nearpod and Desmos and others, and so that teachers could actually see their students and observe their students working, and then provide real-time feedback. And we all know that research says when you get that kind of real-time feedback and coaching and guidance when they need it, learning it actually increases. We also saw a lot of data-informed learning going on in the teaching and learning practices. We saw parents as learning partners in ways we'd not seen before. The surveys suggest both from teachers and parents that there were more frequent and interactive communications with parents. And we also saw teachers involving parents in some of the lesson design. Not a lot, but there were some. About 2/3 of our teachers say that they actually do involve parents every once in a while, and about 16% said that they do that weekly. And let me just give you an example. One teacher was talking about how when California does their initiatives, and we've got a lot of them that we vote on, she has her students actually investigate that and put pamphlets together that have the issues and the pros and the cons, and then they use that as a vehicle for generating discussion with parents at home, which is really, really incredible. So there's lots of ways that teachers are beginning to see that they can actually involve parents in lessons, and the engagement of students in learning. That was the biggest challenge when teachers went to distance learning, and they met that challenge with at least 3 ways of doing this. One was active participation during the synchronous sessions, but others were student-driven research projects where kids got a lot of choice, and that really, we all know that engages kids, and student-led breakouts, and sometimes student-led parent-teacher conferences. So there are lots of new directions going there. We also asked students about what they needed in order to learn in ways that using digital tools. And you can see that this is a Padlet. So in just a second, I'm going to have you jump to that Padlet. But what they said is they wanted increased clarity in terms of what was expected, what were the rubrics, et cetera. They didn't use that terminology, but that's really what they talked about. What are the standards that I have to hit? What are the timelines, et cetera? How do we improve? They wanted improvement of teacher-student communications, and mostly they said, I want answers immediately. When I email or when I text, I really want that responsiveness from teachers. They wanted teachers to listen more closely to students' perspective. And I think this one came out particularly because of the pandemic and the fact that they were under a lot of stress through various reasons. And they really wanted teachers to be empathetic and listen to them. And then finally, they wanted teachers to be relatable. They wanted wanted to relate to their teacher. It's one of the most important relationships that young people have, and they really wanted that, and said so. So what I'd like you to do for the next 3 to 4 minutes is to jump to that Padlet. I think Rosa put it in the chat. Is that correct? And so you can jump over there, and what we want you to do is click on one of these buttons and share one way that your school uses technology to ensure clarity for students, to ensure good teacher-student communications, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to be quiet for about 3 to 4 minutes, and just jump over there and share some of the strategies that you are already doing to meet these student recommendations. I see community circles. That's great. It's all about communication, isn't it? And we're really asking, how does technology make that possible for you? Survey students through Google Forms for student preferences and feedback. That's great, so that when you then design lessons, you can actually personalize that lesson. Student voice through Flipgrid. And this is all listening closely to students and being responsive. That's great. Improving teacher-student communications. I mentioned community circles, but this one is really interesting, allowing for chat back channels, which is great because you can get that perspective of the students while you're watching video, while you're working on various things, and that interaction is so important. Google Forms, leaving constant feedback on assignments. Absolutely. Just a quick story about that. There's been some research studies about whether or not you should give grades or comments or both. And what they find is that if you do both comments and grades on an assignment, the student will look at the grade and throw the comments away. Whereas if you put comments in, they will actually read the comments. Increase clarity using Google Docs to make comments. Absolutely. Kids love the feedback that you give them. And this one is really important, providing feedback to students on the spot. Rubrics posted. And let's go to the last one, better relate to the student perspective. Student interest surveys. Absolutely. Using social media. That's interesting. As a positive way to connect with students, families, and communities, Desmos check-ins, et cetera. I'm going to leave this up, so feel free to continue to add, but I'm going to jump back to my slides. These are great ideas, and I think it's important that we listen to students about what they want and what they think will make their learning better. So let me go back to that. Okay, so that was talking about research question 2, which is really the changes in the classroom and in the school. The third research question that we talk about is the effect on digital adoption and inclusion, which is really about the home. And to what extent have parents increased their use of broadband at the home to support education, good digital citizenship, and improved experiences with family members. And what we found is that of those parents who did respond to the surveys, and that the percentage of parents who responded was really pretty low, but 90% of them said they do have internet access at home. The other 10% said they either use hotspots that their child brings home, or they don't have internet access. Interestingly enough, only 65% of students said that the access they did have at home met their distance learning needs, and the other 35% said my screen freezes all the time, or my data plan runs out, or I don't have that kind of access that I need. And you've all heard those stories, I'm sure. The parents' use of digital tools to support learning really improved here. And we found, I mentioned earlier that your approach has been very intentional and helpful to parents, one-to-one oftentimes. And we talked to many schools, many school leadership teams who actually said, we made it. We're 100% of our parents are actually on the portal and interacting, which is amazing. We actually asked how frequently they used it, and 45% said they used it weekly. 57% said they reviewed online homework assignments at least weekly, and 81% of parents moving on to digital citizenship said they actually discussed internet safety. Now, this is not the same thing as digital citizenship, but it certainly is a foundation in combination with what teachers do and others do in school. It's really a way forward towards good digital citizenship. The fourth research question that we do is the impact on student outcomes. And as you can see, typically we look at state testing and we compare the growth of the partner schools and school to home with statewide statistics. Of course, we couldn't do that because those state tests have not been administered in the last few years. But we did ask especially the interviews with the school leadership teams, we asked them about this. And one of the things they said is that every one of the 27 schools said they administered summative assessments. Some were happier with theirs than others, but they used things like STAR, SBAC rubrics, IAB, NWA, and some used portfolios. We also heard from them in saying that they had alternative assessments that they came up with, that students were using digital tools in new ways. And part of it was that it was difficult to administer the assessments that you typically do over the internet. And so they would have to come up with new ways of actually seeing if kids really were getting it, were understanding it. And oftentimes they use digital tools like Flipgrid and others for kids to explain conceptual understandings and give feedback. And then finally, teachers said that almost daily they checked for understanding, and they leveraged what they learned through these observations and these exit polls, et cetera, into data-informed learning. So they actually changed up their instruction as they went. When we asked about learning loss, we asked students about it, and one of the things we found is that 16% said they learned more online, and sometimes that vehicle works for some kids in ways that the classroom didn't. So 40% said they learned about the same, and 44% said they learned less. And then finally, in this area, we looked at the reclassification of English learners, and many of the school leadership teams said it was very difficult to do this assessment online. It was really, really difficult with all the disruptions within the home as they were doing it, and so on. But what we found, when we looked at the data, what we found is that the reclassification of English learners was higher in partner schools percentage-wise than statewide. And in fact, the data shows that on average, the partner schools actually reclassified about an average of 20 students last year, whereas the statewide average was about 10. So congratulations to you guys on that piece. And then finally, whoops. We wanted to, let me see if I've got time to do this. Let's see. I don't think that we do. So I think we're going to skip that one, if you don't mind, Rosa. Thank you for the preparation you did on it. We were going to ask about conceptual understanding and the ways that you use technology to learn more about what's going on with your students. And I mentioned Flipgrid. There's lots of other ways and circles of learning, et cetera. And then finally, RQ5, which is an influence on changes in policy and practice. Typically, we look at the LCAPs and see if districts are starting to mention investing in some of the 10 core components. This year, Elaine did a great job of looking at state and federal policies. And one of the reasons is that the silver lining within the pandemic was that it became very aware that there was injustice in terms of the digital divide and huge digital inequities. And so this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to see all this money invested as we go. And Elaine has in the full report, when you get it, she's talked about the Infrastructure and Investment Act, which of course was signed just this week. And one of the important pieces of that is it made permanent the Affordable Connectivity Plan program, and which allows consumers a monthly stipend to use in the way that they choose from service providers. And I know a lot of you have talked about the fact that there's upselling and downselling during that you get locked into a program that your parents get locked into programs they really didn't want. And there's important consumer protection measures within that prevent some of those things from happening. So that's really important for us to look at. The achievement gap, a lot of money has gone into addressing the impact of the pandemic. In some cases, it's just to do that transition and begin to do distance learning. In other cases, it's really to accelerate learning. And especially the Title I schools have received and will receive a tremendous amount of money. Elaine has picked up some data on this that says that per pupil spending in California will average $21,000 in 2021. And that puts California really at, in the top nationally instead of in the bottom. And there is that opportunity as we look at this investment of huge amount of money to address digital inequity and achievement gaps. And finally, the capacity building is going to be important. I think one of the speakers yesterday, Richard, I think it was, said that when you're looking at digital inequity, digital equity, it's a lot more than just connectivity. And these bills allow you to do a lot more than just connect, which is really, really important. So I'd like to just end, we have one more thing, and then I'd like to just kind of end this piece by saying that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, that these investments potentially will not come around again. And it's our responsibility to make sure that the money is used wisely. And school to home is such a great model to know what and where to spend this money to really make this happen in a very important way that puts students first. So think about that. And then finally, I'm going to talk about one of the things that, again, a shout out to Augustine and the team, that a lot of these recommendations that came from the 27 interviews that we did in May and June came right back to the team, as did the survey work. And as a result, a lot of the recommendations that came from you all went to Augustine and to the team, and they actually were very responsive about doing pivots and changing up the parent modules and changing up the teacher modules. So a lot of that has been done. So these three recommendations are higher level. One is, we heard from a lot of you the question, what's next? We've done school to home. We've been involved with school to home for a long time. What is next? And so one of the recommendations that we made last year and we're making again this year is to establish a new tier of services for partner schools. Another one is to expand the school to home model to more Title I schools in the partner districts that we have. And then the third one is to actually, and this is Sunny and Augustine have been just tremendous with this, is to work with education leaders to distribute this great model throughout California. So last reminder is that we do have an opportunity to close the digital divide with this huge investment. We do have a great model. And, it's up to us to make sure our voices are heard within our districts and within our schools to make it happen in a substantive way. So congratulations on where you've come this year. It's been very impressive. The data show it. And we're looking forward to seeing deciding what's next.